So I'm Miriam Ellman. I am AN's Executive Director, and it's a pleasure to have our faculty members from across the country joining today. Typically, our webinars are only open to our members, as most of you know. But given the fact that many of our partner organizations also work on combating this ugly propaganda, we thought it would be really useful to invite colleagues who are working in the campus space. And so thank you so much for joining us. And I also want to thank a group of students from the Atlanta area who have been fighting courageously against virulent anti-Israel and anti-Zionist hostility on their campuses, including against the Deadly Exchange campaign. And Atlanta is in many ways ground zero for this, which you'll hear about. So I welcome the students and thank you for joining. And of course, many thanks go to our two AAN sections, the section for faculty in STEM and the section for women faculty who are co-sponsoring today's webinar. And Slavka Halper chairs the STEM section on the call and will be moderating today's event. You know, we really wanted to host this program on this topic for a long time. And so I do appreciate Slavka, you having put it together along with Amy Ellman, chair of the section for women faculty, and for making it happen today. And of course, thank you so much, Robbie and Steve, for sharing your expertise and your insights and your experiences today. Before I turn the floor over to Slavka, I'd like to just say a few words about Deadly Exchange. It's featured in my own work over the years and my research, and we devote some pages to it in the new AN guide and resource book for faculty and university leaders. And in the title for today's webinar, we defined it as an anti-Semitic campaign. And here at AN, you know that we do not level the charge of anti-Semitism lightly. But in this case, it is very apt. And I know Robbie and Steve will explain more about why that is shortly. It's also fitting that we're holding this webinar on Passover because the Deadly Exchange campaign was actually launched on Passover back in 2017. 6 years ago, the virulently anti-Zionist group Jewish Voice for Peace featured Deadly Exchange as a supplement to its 2017 Haggadah. They introduced the Deadly Exchange campaign, calling it Ending U.S. Israel Police Exchanges, as part of a plan for, quote, how we leave Mitzrayim, how we leave Egypt. I kid you not, it was actually in their Haggadah. And it's in that usurped, culturally appropriated Jewish Voice for Peace Haggadah that we first hear of how American Jewish organizations are colluding with Israel to hurt and harm fellow Americans. Now, Jewish Voice for Peace concocted this cockamamie campaign, but today it's promoted by many other groups and activists in the anti-Israel movement. It's ubiquitous on campus. It pops up in our communities across the country. This Thursday at SUNY Binghamton, which is just an hour from where I live in central New York, Students for Justice in Palestine chapter is hosting an event titled Deadly Exchange from the IDF to the American Police. Last month in California at UC Davis, SJP hosted a similar event where students could learn about how Israel is training American cops to, quote, deploy brutal tactics on marginalized civilians. There's not a shred of evidence to any of this, but this campaign persists. And if anything, it's become something of a staple in the anti-Israel narrative. So that's by way of my brief introduction. And sorry for taking some time, but I'm really invested in combating this particular campaign. But let me now introduce our moderator. Dr. Slavka Halper is a professor of pathology, the College of Veterinary Medicine at University of Georgia in Athens. And she is at the Augusta University UJA Medical Partnership. She became an active member of AEN. We're very grateful for that because she became really concerned about rising anti-Semitism and rising anti-Zionism. And she wanted me to let you all know that she very much appreciates the friends and colleagues that she's met during her time in AEN and is very grateful to have the opportunity to collaborate with other academics who share her desire to combat campus anti-Semitism. And so with that, I will turn the floor over to Slavka, please.
Well, Miriam, thank you for the very nice introduction and for your words about the deadly exchange, which makes it much easier for me to introduce our really distinguished and special speakers, Robbie Friedman and Steve Pomerantz. So I was surprised to see that Robbie Friedman is actually almost my neighbor. He's a professor emeritus at Georgia State. And I really didn't realize how bad things can be in Atlanta, because here in Athens, everything is kind of in the bars with beer and others. But he is the one who really started the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. So, and he was in the Department of Criminal Justice at Georgia State. And the program was started in 1992. So that's more than, I guess, 30 years ago, and it's still alive. And not just that, we can see kind of a translation from academia into the community, meaning to the law enforcement, where I guess JINSA and Steve Pomerantz took over. So he also Robbie also served as the chair of the Department of Criminal Justice and Advisory Board for Study Abroad and Exchange Program at Georgia State University and some other positions. Steve Pomerantz is a tough boy from the Bronx who went to NYU, and then he became and did some postgraduate studies elsewhere. And then he served in the U.S. Air Force, attaining rank of captain. And then he joined the FBI and rose in rank until, I guess, becoming an assistant director in the Clinton administration. I think I'm getting this one right. And then he became an expert in the area of terrorism, as well as criminal justice. After his retirement, he joined JINSA, which is the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. And he's the one who coordinates now the trips of American police force to Israel for training. And that's, I think, he learned the tricks from Robbie. So what we'll start with Robbie Friedman, because he's basically the founder of the program. He'll talk for 20 minutes, then Steve will talk for 20 minutes, and then we'll open the forum for questions from the audience. So thank you for coming to it. And please, Robbie, are you ready?
I'm ready. Well, thank you. Appreciate Professor Harper's introduction. Good to be back with Steve again. And Miriam, I follow your work and appreciate it greatly. It has been very helpful to us as well. Let me give you a little bit of a background, not just for the program, but perhaps explain it from a perspective of a faculty member. So when I arrived at Georgia State University, I came from the University of Minnesota after a sabbatical. And before that, I taught for 6 years at the University of Haifa in Israel. And when I came to the university, all I was interested in is what I would call the blackboard, the computer, and the library. Nothing else mattered. For 3 years, that's all I focused on. And I was not involved in politics. I was not involved in programs. I was not involved in the field other than the professional interest. And then one day the dean asked who can do international programs. Well, I thought I could. So I took a group of graduates and undergraduate students on a studies abroad program to Israel. And this was for credit, for criminal justice. And because of my work with the Israel police, I actually did the first field experimental studies on community policing in Israel back in the 80s. So that probably reveals my age, but at that time, it was really a pioneering study, after which about 120 posts of neighborhood police officers were instituted all over the country. I also created a contract between social workers and police officers for joint partnership between the two agencies. So in Israel, if you work with police, because it is in the Ministry of, today it's called National Security, but it used to be the Ministry of Police, it oversees prisons, and because police also have prosecutors, you can also get access to the court. So given my contacts with the Israel police, it was fairly easy to set up the Studies Abroad program. And I thought it was a one-time deal. There was a demand for more, but keep in mind, this was 1990. And what happened then was the announcement from Tokyo by the head of the International Olympic Committee that Atlanta won the hosting of the '96 Games. And what crossed my mind at that time was how great it is to be in an Olympic city. At that time, I was in an age that sports mattered. Today, I'm less excited about it. Even golf doesn't excite me. So the second thought that crossed my mind was Munich 1972. And for those of you whose memory is short, this was when 11 Israeli athletes were slain by Palestinian terrorists who raided the Olympic Village in Munich, and it ended up in a horrible slaughter. And by the way, a German police officer was killed in that raid as well. Germans botched the event. That's not the point for today. That's for a whole different presentation. So having some discussions about how do you help secure the games basically led to Israel willing to help with their experience in terrorism. And what they wanted in return is to have a group of officers visiting Atlanta to learn about and listen to it carefully, civil rights and liberties and constitutional rights. This is an initiative that came from the police. And the reason is they found that citizens are concerned about that. And they wanted to make sure that officers can learn about those parameters of law enforcement from the United States. And by the way, since 1974, many of the Supreme Court precedents are relying on U.S. Supreme Court rulings. So we started in 1992. Until 96, we have done nothing but take officers who had chiefs and sheriffs who had Olympic venue security responsibilities. We took them to Israel. Israelis came here in exchange. And then after 96, we have, I thought that the program could be shut down because we achieved our objectives. And just to show you how mired I was in the 96 Olympics, I didn't even think that Olympics are a 2-year event. You have the Summer Olympics, 2 years later, you have the Winter Olympics, 2 years later, again, the Summer Olympics, and so on and so forth. And the security community is a family because they are roving from Olympics to Olympics. Very quickly, we got a request from the state of Utah to help with the Winter Olympics of 2002. And then we moved on to London and Rio. And so we have a pretty good, strong track with helping Olympic security. And I can tell you that we have literally saved lives, particularly in London and Rio. So until 2009, so we are talking about almost more than half of the lifespan of the program, we were, I would say, sailing scot-free. At that time, as Professor Halper mentioned, I was a full professor in the Department of Criminal Justice. I chaired the department for 13 years. I held the position of endowed chair of public safety partnerships. I would say a pretty proud academic career. And I was very proud of the involvement in the field to be able to make a difference. I'm a great believer in August Comte's old saying that you want to know in order to predict, and you want to predict in order to make a difference in our situation, which is prediction, knowledge, policy. In French, by the way, it sounds much better. So I sort of wanted to apply that and continue to apply that, and the program has basically evolved into leadership development for law enforcement. And I treat law enforcement as a helping profession, and the leaders of law enforcement as CEOs of public service organizations that need to know how to improve what they do, which is basically service to the community that they serve. So that's the essence of it. The first signs of, how shall I call it, what we are discussing today started in 2009. And since then, we've been under constant attack, including personal, institutional. To sum it up, we're now in our 14th year of these attacks, and they basically can be described as petitions and demands to shut us down. Interestingly enough, what started on campus moved out to local politics, including the mayor's office. So 2 mayors ago, there was a demand to the mayor to shut us down, as if the mayor can shut us down. He cannot. He can stop the relationship of the police department, but not shut us down in the university. In 2010, there was a petition to shut us down. The university president met with the students. We had a statement signed by 41 Nobel laureates who opposed the closure of university-based programs that may have an affiliation with Israel. Didn't mention GILEE or us in any way, but when the students met with the president and they demanded to shut us down, the president basically said the university is about exchange of ideas and knowledge, not about shutting programs down. He asked if they had anything else on the agenda. They said no. He says that's the end of the meeting. And I must proudly say that since then, that was the attitude of the university. And we're now running through it's the 3rd president since the program began. And that includes deans that have been very supportive. Given today's climate that Miriam mentioned at the beginning of the program, I must say that I don't take it for granted, and I'm very proud of the university that is supported. I'll give you one example in terms of sets of petitions against us. In 2010 or 11, there were 15 faculty members who signed a petition to shut us down. It was ignored. 2 years ago, after George Floyd, there was a petition signed by 202 faculty members and some other academics who are not faculty. And interestingly, 2 of them were interviewed on public radio, telling things about the program that I was not aware of. Mind you, I burst the program, I run the program, but what they said about the program was news to me. Excuse my cynicism, okay? It's another way of saying that they're lying. If that hint wasn't clear before. So it was ironic that the following day, the president of the university was on the same public radio show and asked to comment on that. And he said, I understand where the petition is coming from. It's purely ideological and political. I've asked for facts and evidence to support and corroborate the claims. I'm still waiting. Okay? And it's very important to understand that these attacks are knowingly groundless, are knowingly faulty, and that particularly pertains to the JVP, Deadly Exchange, which is actually composed by another organization whose director is on the board of JVP. They know that they lie, and they still promote that lie and repeating it enough times, and people buy into it. And that's where the real problem is. And by the way, when you mention in the Jewish community that it's the technique of the big lie, oh, no, we cannot say that we don't do what the Nazis did. Well, I'm sorry, this is exactly what they do. And this is exactly what the technique of the big lie is. And I can give you examples to refute it, and maybe we'll leave that to the Q&A period. Well, last week or so, there was the latest petition. So we had 15, we had 200 plus. Now there are 20 faculty members who signed the petition to shut us down. And now I'm getting to the next stage, to shut the new design for the Atlanta Police Public Safety Training Center down. So we are in a very good company, because they want to shut the police down, they want to shut a university down, or a program in a university down, they want to shut America down, they want to shut Israel down. As Groucho Marx said, you know, I may not want to be a member of this club, but because they want me, but it's a pretty good club to be part of. Interestingly enough, two of those faculty members, particularly one, his office shares a wall with mine, and his door is next door to mine. We have yet to exchange a word on anything other than maybe saying a cursory hello in the hallway. He never once claimed that he wants to know what it is that we do, yet he went to sign that petition. To show you how stupid it is, it's legal, it's under the freedom of expression, I understand that, but it is stupid because it is like signing a mortgage when you don't know what is the percentage rate that you're going to pay. Nobody in the right mind would do that. But I'm sure that he is convinced that he is in his right mind. I tend to disagree. So the situation now is that we have the support of the university. We have continued attacks. Interestingly enough, they don't change. The only variation that I've seen in the last few years is after they tried to have a resolution in the student government, Georgia State, that failed. They tried it again, and then they realized that if they just attack us on the basis of our relationship with Israel, it is really anti-Semitic. So they started to look at the other countries that we have relationships with, and out of the 30 countries that we work with, they picked some that are non-democracies. China, for example, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. The issue is that working with a country doesn't mean that you go and study those values. Maybe what you do with those countries is tell them what are the American values of policing, not that you learn what are the values of policing in dictatorships. But people are not interested in facts, they're just interested in smearing and maligning and in incapacitating a program. So I think that is basically the background for the program. I think the points were quite clear. I continue to run the program. We are a fortunate outfit in the university to be able to make a difference in the field, provide an important service. And I would direct many of you to look at our website and look at the letters of support that we get from legislative resolutions, academics, the business community, and law enforcement. We have about 130 of those, of which we're very proud. We stand on very solid ground. We know what we're doing. I would never teach or encourage people to abuse anyone. That's not what we do. And it's regrettable that they continue that campaign, because it is wrong. And I'll stop at that.
I need to unmute myself. And thank you very much. And I hope we'll find out more about Steve, how the two of you first of all met and how you're collaborating or cooperating your efforts. So Steve, would you like to take over now?
Sure, Slavka. I assume you can all hear me at this point. And I have to say, Slavka, my biography, the abbreviated biography, Slavka forgot the most important thing, didn't you, Slavka?
What's that?
Which is that you and I share 4 beautiful granddaughters.
Well, and they call you Grumpy, and they call you Grumpy, and I wonder why.
Slavka's
so
son and my daughter
my son and his
married
daughter are married.
And met in Israel. That's another whole story. Okay. And I have to also comment on something Robbie said. First, let me acknowledge Robbie as the godfather of these law enforcement trips. He saw something that he recognized could be of great benefit to both the United States and Israel, and he implemented that. Others have followed, myself included, and together, I think all of us have made a contribution, and a significant contribution. I'll go into that in a little further detail. Robbie started off with a mention of Munich, and that resonated with me because I was in my career just relatively new at the FBI, but I can say that the Munich incident, the attack of the Israeli and the deaths of those Israeli athletes, really brought home, certainly to my organization, as well as to the rest of the U.S. national security structure, great vulnerabilities and an indication of challenges that lay ahead. That was a moment when I would say that certainly in the FBI, the counterterrorism objectives became clear and paramount. So big event. All right. So let me talk about the JINSA program. JINSA has been around since the 1970s and focused the founding myth, and myth, as you all better educated people than I am know, is not synonymous with untruth. Myth is larger than that. The founding myth of JINSA is during the Yom Kippur War, when Israel desperately needed resupply. It was slow in coming, and a number of prominent Jewish Americans went on the offensive to try to influence the U.S. government to resupply Israel, and found that there was no, ultimately successfully, but they found that there was no organization in the Jewish space that focused on the national security implications of the relationship between the two countries. Out of that realization grew JINSA, and a very close relationship, but more on the military side than anything else. After 9/11, the next seminal event, there was a recognition that law enforcement, recognition in this country, that law enforcement actually was part of the national security apparatus, certainly when it came to counterterrorism. So JINSA was approached by senior officers in the New York City Police Department to leverage their already existing relationships in Israel for the benefit of law enforcement. JINSA was happy to do so, but recognized they had no expertise in law enforcement as they did in military issues. They ultimately found their way to me and asked me if I would, by that time I was retired from the FBI. I was in the business world. But when they asked me to put together the program, I said, yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense to me. I'll do it. I'll put together a program for you, and then I'll fade away into the woodwork. 20 some years later, I'm still doing it. I've not faded into the woodwork yet. And the sole reason I do it is because of the value I see coming out of it. It's been absolutely as rewarding as anything I've ever done, and more rewarding than a lot of things I've done. So, but the origins of the program are solely out of 9/11 and the recognition of the unique position of law enforcement in counterterrorism. If you think about the counterterrorism programs, all the organizations involved in the component of a national strategy have either a mission of prevention of terrorism, the intelligence gathering and the intelligence dissemination of information relative to terrorism, or a response requirement, the fire, EMS, etc. Law enforcement has both. They gather information in the hope of preventing terrorism, and they certainly play a critical role when a terrorist incident takes place. And when I'm speaking about law enforcement, notwithstanding the fact that I come out of a federal organization, I'm really directing my remarks now at local law enforcement, the 18,000 municipal police departments, sheriff's departments, state police organizations, et cetera, with 1 million or close to 1 million officers on the streets of this country, as opposed to the FBI, which has something like 25,000 agents. So the need for professional training in local law enforcement after 9/11 became one of the several critical findings of those who did postmortems on 9/11, and they were absolutely correct, no doubt about it. So all sorts of initiatives were undertaken. The program that I built at JINSA is one of those. People ask me, JINSA, like a lot of 501c3s, relies entirely on contributions. And people ask me questions about why they should give money. And one of the questions is, why do you do it? Why did you choose Israel as a place to take law enforcement executives for an understanding and dialogue in counterterrorism? I said, that's easy. First of all, they didn't volunteer for this. Israel didn't volunteer for this, but of necessity, of absolute necessity, for the 75 years of their existence, and even before that, they had a need to develop this kind of expertise. As we all know, necessity is the mother of invention. Blood was flowing in the streets, and they had to find a way to eliminate that, or at least modify it as far as they could. And equally importantly, when they asked why Israel, I said, Israel has not got, as good as they are, they've not got the best counterterrorism program in the world. I would say probably China has, or maybe the Soviet Union, Russia has, because if you are suspected of being a terrorist or a collaborator with a terrorist, they make you disappear. They make your family disappear. They have a system of government entirely different that we don't want to see replicated in this country. Israel is a democracy. I know we're facing, as we speak today, a debate about all of this, but Israel is founded, I have a friend in Israel who often says our countries were both visited by the British many years ago, and they left behind a system of laws, a system of government that we largely follow. And that's true. When I take law enforcement people to Israel, they immediately identify with their colleagues. We operate under a system of laws and regulations with very strict oversight, a free press that overlooks and comments often unfairly on our tactics and methods. And it's a meaningful experience largely because of that. I mentioned that Israel has, I mentioned that local law enforcement has a dual mission: prevention and response and investigation, subsequent investigation. That's what my program was built on, that realization that we had to do both things. We had to talk about how you prevent terrorism and how you respond to it. This program, the JINSA program, is built solely for law enforcement executives. We do no training. That's a significant issue when you're talking about, and I certainly agree with Robbie's characterization, the counter, the protests, the agitation, or whatever you want to call it, on the part of the JVP and others, is based on lying about the program. We do not train it. If they see guns when they're in Israel with me, it's because it's on the hips of the police officers that we interact with. This is about teaching management of how the best way to collect, analyze, and share intelligence on the one hand, and the best way to respond to a terrorist incident in a coordinated, efficient manner that will also save lives and prevent further damage. That's what the program is about. We take chiefs of police, sheriffs in large departments. We may take an assistant chief or a deputy chief or another senior person. It is not about boots on the ground training and crowd control. So that's in a nutshell what the program is. I need to say that, coming out of a government background as I do, it's often hard to implement something, be involved in implementation of something and see it through to fruition and results. I often say some of the things that I like to think I was involved in starting when I was at the FBI, Slavka and my grandchildren will probably be the first ones who may see the tangible results of that. Not in this case. I have had, in the same way Robbie has, feedback from many, many of the participants who talk about this as the most valuable professional experience they have ever had. They come back, they make changes in the way that their agencies do things, in training, in procedure, and they implement them, and it makes their communities safer. And that's just, as long as I hear that, I will continue to do it. I've reached the age where I don't really want to work anymore. I'd rather hang around my grandchildren. And every year, it's almost become an institutional joke. Every year I say, I think maybe I'm not going to do this anymore, and someone else will have to do it. And then I go to some law enforcement meeting of some kind or other, and I have people say, will you take me to Israel this year? I've heard so much about it. And as long as I keep hearing that, I'll keep, and as long as we can continue to do it, I will. I want to say just a couple of words. I think I got a few minutes left about the resistance to the program. And again, Robbie deals with this much more. He's got the, I was going to say the problem. That's probably an unfair characterization, but the reality that he's on a college campus. I don't have that. The first that really popped into my mind in recognition that there was resistance came not really from the JVP deadly exchange, but as a result of a city council in Durham, North Carolina, passing a resolution that they wouldn't have their chief of police participate. That's the first time it popped on my radar. Then, of course, came the JVP program. My reaction initially was to ignore it. Sometimes we all do this in life, where recognizing something just gives it, and fighting back, if you will, just gives it gives the opposition more fodder. So I basically ignored it. And then, of course, came the George Floyd incident, and then they discovered, the JVP and others discovered or recognized it was a perfect melding, of anti-police, anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and then the deadly exchange. But by that point, it got more traction than we were willing to ignore. Robbie and I talked, we each did what we did. And so now, yeah, I will fight back. I know you've seen that op-ed that I had in the forward. There've been other things as well. What I won't do, what I will not, I'll engage with them anytime they want. They want me to show up with something, give me a platform, I'll engage with them. I'll engage on college campuses. What I won't do is refight the entire 75-year history of Israel and talk about the Nakba and the poor Palestinians. And I'll say, if you want to talk about this program, you want to challenge me on this program, I'll engage with you. I'm not going to revisit the history of the Jewish people since the Exodus. So that's kind of where I am now. I will say I have, as far as I know, I have never lost, no, not as far as I know, I have never lost a participant to their activities. There may be, I have no way of knowing if someone I've invited has said no based on their efforts. I will say there have been very, very few people I've ever invited who said no. Quite the contrary. I have people approaching me all the time, wanting to go. So from my perspective, in fact, I said that one time in some op-ed or something I wrote. I said, I don't like the Jewish Voices for Peace for all their activities, not only Deadly Exchange, and to the extent that they spend time and money on this Deadly Exchange effort that detracts them from other things based on the impact it's had on me and our program. God bless them. I'm glad to be able to say they've been a total failure. In the couple of minutes that I think I have remaining, just a couple, I just want to enlarge the conversation a little bit because we're all dealing with it now. I know you are. Is the whole anti-Semitism, anti-Zionist movement on college campuses. People ask me, what do you worry about when it comes to Jewish security and the Jewish future in America? And let me say, I started in the FBI in Dothan, Alabama in 1968, largely immersed, for a New York City Jewish boy, largely immersed in the battle against the Ku Klux Klan. Much of it had happened in the years immediately prior to my arrival there, but I still spent a lot of time on it. I went to Detroit after that. I was involved, some of you may remember the famous bus bombing in Pontiac, Michigan, where the Klan decided the way to stop bus bombing, to stop busing to achieve racial integration was to blow up the buses. And I was responsible for that investigation. I went on to then I was chief of counterterrorism at the FBI, and a lot of that in the if you'll remember, in the mid and late 80s were the white supremacist organization and the violence. I'm just establishing my bona fides. I know these people, and I've known them for a long time. I understand them. I've talked to them, and they represent a danger to the Jewish community, for sure, and particularly when you talk about sporadic acts of violence. But thank God, in a political way, in a serious political way, they've never taken root in this country. What I worry about for Slavka and my grandchildren is the other side of things. The anti-Semitism coming, I would say, from the political left, the tying of the joining of the anti-Zionism as an extension of anti-Semitism, which seems to be gaining more traction on the left. That's what I worry about. Not to minimize an incident like the Tree of Life Synagogue, where people lose their lives. That's a real issue. It will probably always be with us, unfortunately. We've been dealing with these kinds of organizations since the end of the Civil War, and they'll always be with us. But when I think about the future of the Jewish community in this country, I worry a lot more about what's coming from the other side. I could elucidate, but I think I'm out of time, so I'll quit.
If I can jump on the last elements that Steve mentioned, I want to highlight one comment that we received from one of the chiefs who went to Israel in terms of what it is that we do and the kind of impact on them. And we had a discussion on people he supervises. And he said one of his best takeaways from his program in Israel was to treat his underlings, so to speak, as human beings. And I was shocked, and I said, "You didn't think that your officers are human beings?" He says, "Not until I was in the leadership program." That is the stuff that we do. Not we're not a police academy and we don't teach tactics, but to me, to have a police chief come up with an insight like this, it's worth the whole effort.
I'm going to take, well, I know we have time issue, and I would love to answer questions, but I do want to build on what Robbie just said, and I apologize. I always thank him because he always comes up with something that I've forgotten. But one of the unintended consequences, we always talk about unintended consequences. When we started the JINSA program, it was 100% motivated by the desire to equip American law enforcement with a better ability to do their job. After 3 of these trips, it suddenly dawned on me what the impact that Robbie just mentioned. I've had many of the people we took to Israel reach out to me afterward, or comment on the trip, or do something when they got back, to further the understanding that they had about Jewish communities, the Jewish sense. We take them to Yad Vashem, they meet a lot of Israelis while they're there, and they come to understand both the history and the sensitivity of Jewish communities to violence and threats of violence and anti-Semitism. And they come back with that understanding. Israel sells itself. You don't have to pontificate. Israel and our people, the Jewish people, sell themselves. They come back, they reach out to the Jewish community leaders, they offer them their assistance, and that has been a huge positive unintended consequence of this program.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry, I have to interrupt you, Steve, but yeah, I like people to ask some questions. And maybe I'll ask, because I'm a moderator, ask Robbie a question, whether he has any, do you have any collaborations or contact with other universities in Georgia? Because I've never heard about this program at UGA.
I actually spoke at UGA several times to groups of students. It's serendipitous. It's not a ongoing exchange or program. But when people want to learn about the program, we're happy to talk about it.
You talk to law students or where they teach criminal justice?
I'm sorry?
Whether you talk to law students or go to, I guess, departments of criminal justice where they have it?
No, it is usually some sort of a student group that is interested in Middle East politics or in criminology, and then that would be the platform. I've retired from an academic position, so I don't do that anymore.
Okay, so you are just having fun.
Yes.
Yes. Do we have any questions from the audience? You want to ask a question, you need to unmute yourself. I see that Ed has unmuted. You have a question?
Yes, thank you, Steve and Robbie. I particularly appreciated your saying, Steve, that there's no boots on the ground training and that it's all organizational, because that's the charge that's been leveled against this program and the other programs with Israel. I wonder if you could be more specific about what you actually do there for those of us who are not in this area or have any connection with it. How do you go about training people to have greater organizational skills? What does that actually mean, and what does it involve?
You know, Ed, that's a good question. A lot of it is just, actually most of the time is spent in I hate to say classrooms, but in that kind of a dialogue where we talk about, okay, how do you, the Israeli law enforcement, how do you organize yourselves for a response to a terrorist incident? I mean, there's all kinds of think about what goes on. You've seen it on TV, and there's a methodology to responding successfully, and I mean, Israelis have that down pat, as pat as you can, and so that's one way. We sit in a classroom, we talk about how they gather intelligence and how that intelligence is shared to the street level officer. Again, given the geography over there, they may get a notice from their internal security organization, the Shin Bet, that a terrorist has just been dispatched from the West Bank and is headed toward Jerusalem. They have a very, very short time to get that information out. They may have a description of a car. They may have, a description of a suspect, but they have a methodology, and that methodology is learnable, and it can be duplicated. So that's a lot of it. Most of our time is spent in that kind of environment. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it's helpful. Thank you. And let me follow it up.
Can I add to that? Because our program is based on peer-to-peer on-site training. So as Steve says, we're sitting in classrooms. For example, when we meet with the police commissioner or with the district commander, we talk about what challenges do they have? How do they address them? And that includes recruitment, training, deployment, logistics support. All of these issues are organizational issues. They are leadership issues. They are not tactical in the sense of having boots on the ground. And those who claim that that's what is happening simply don't understand how the program works.
Ed, I have to make an exception here and just say 1 year I took a group of bomb technicians, leadership bomb. Again, you want to make when you take 10 people from American law enforcement with a population of 1 million law enforcement officers and 18,000 agencies, you got to do it thinking about how you can get your message out. So I took a leadership group of bomb technicians. That was boots on the ground. That was sitting there and learning how the Israelis, who have great technology, disable bombs, learning about what the latest components in bombs are. Now, if the Jewish Voices for Peace want to complain that these people came back from Israel and were better able to deal with bombings of all kinds in their community, that this was somehow immoral or whatever, let them complain about that. But that was the one exception when you could call it boots on the ground training.
Well, let me sharpen this because this is very important. I had a Jewish leader, a rabbi. We had a discussion and he says, I'm against the militarization of police. I said, describe the militarization to me. He says, I don't want to see tanks in the streets of Atlanta. I said, when did you see tanks in the streets of Atlanta? People just don't understand what they say by militarization of police, okay? Police actually, with all the harm that is perceived that they do, and some do, I'll be the first to acknowledge that, 99% of police are there to maintain public order and to save lives. And we sort of tend to forget that. I mean, when you are in trouble, where do you go to? You go to firefighters and you go to police. And that is what most people do. And they risk their lives so that everybody else in the community can be safe. I don't know if people know how many police officers die every year in the United States in the line of duty. I think that's important to mention because it's in the neighborhood of 150 every year, okay?
Did Fauda get it right? Did Fauda, the Israeli television series, get it right about the logistics?
I admit guilt, I have never watched it.
And it's exactly like American television. There's some accuracy in it.
I
Thank you.
hope are there any other questions? Yes, Miriam?
Yes, thank you so much, Steve and Robbie. One thing that struck me in both of your comments and also in doing some research on deadly exchange over the last 6 years is how many faculty are involved in this. So, we usually think about when people say, well, what's the problem on campus? The go-to place is, well, it's students behaving badly to fellow students, right? It's peer on peer. And so the solution is better training students or giving students more education. And what really strikes me about deadly exchange, I don't think it's unique, but it's very particular to deadly exchange, is the number of faculty who are engaged in promoting it, in signing the petitions. And what's striking to me about it is that it's pure propaganda. Like, we have to teach propaganda, how propaganda works, how it seduces people, how it can be promoted. But here you have faculty not teaching it, but actually participating in it. So I guess my question for both of you is, how do we deal with that? Like, how have you dealt with it? Have you been able to convince faculty who are participatory that that this really isn't something they should be involved in? Have you gotten faculty on the fence to say, I don't want to be signing this petition? Like, how does that work? Because I think that would be really interesting for our members.
I don't know that we have enough time to do this, but I will say that these are two fronts and two different fronts. One is the JVP types. I'm not going to waste my time arguing or discussing because I'm not in the habit of having to justify my existence. It's not up for negotiations, period. As to other faculty, the important part is to bring facts. The same way that you asked the question of, do you have boots on the ground? What do you actually do? And we should have answers to any of those questions. And we should have them at the ready-made situation and not have to research them. And that is why, and I think, Miriam, what you mentioned is very important. It is propaganda and people follow it because it's packaged very well. I mean, the deadly exchange is called a research report. Now, excuse me for playing the academic again. If this would have been a paper submitted to me in an undergraduate class, it would have received an F and a big fat one. Because it is not research, it is not a report. Other than the spaces between the letters and between the lines, Nothing is true. Not a single statement, not a single claim is true. Okay? Now, they manipulate partial facts to make them appear as if they are true. I'll give you quickly 3 examples that are coming out in the deadly exchange. There are many more. One is that the blue lights of police cars in Israel are put in order to intimidate Palestinians. Now, the part of the sentence that is true is that there are blue lights on police cars. The rest is nonsense. Commissioner Turner in 1992 instituted that on all police cars for the simple reason that whether the car is on duty or not, if you see a blue light, and in Israel at that time, the blue light was nothing like the blinding American police lights. It was one of those, what they call the Kojak up on the roof of the car. You can flag it down for him. It was to enhance the sense of safety and security for citizens, not to intimidate anyone. Then they go on and say, by the way, the Israel police racks its guns to intimidate Palestinians. Well, American law enforcement carry a bullet in the chamber when they patrol, when they are on the street. Israeli officers are not allowed. It's against the law and it's against policy to carry a bullet in the chamber. Therefore, if you draw your gun, you have to rack it. So you have that action in order to put the bullet in the chamber. But that does not mean that an officer comes out in the morning, starts his shift at 8 o'clock and ends at say, if it's a 12-hour shift at 8 p.m., that he's going and racking his gun all the time on the street. That is simply not the case. And by the way, shooting regulations and the use of arms in Israel are very stipulated, as Steve mentioned, in very strict laws and policies. And by the way, in Israel, there's a dual system of law. You are tried within the internal police disciplinary court. And if it is a criminal offense, you will be then tried in civil court or criminal court. So, and one last example, they had a group of Israeli officers standing in front of a C-130J. Those who don't know what that is, it's a cargo plane. It happens to be manufactured at Georgia Martin Lockheed plant in Marietta. So they said that the picture was taken in Israel, and that shows the militarization of police. Well, the picture was taken in front of a mural photo at the plant, because no one in the right mind would stand with their back to 4 propellers of a plane, you know, revving behind your head. That is simply not the case. And these are police officers, and the reason they came to the plant is because that airplane has particular symbolism and meaning in Israeli history. And to see how a cargo plane is assembled, there's nothing militarized about it. And the mission of that plane are not military, they're mostly civilian, even if the military is using it. So I can go on and on, but I'll stop here.
Well, I am glad you mentioned the blue lights on the police cars, because I thought they have them on just to get ahead in traffic.
No, that's because they're rushing
I
home to
was
dinner.
told. Well, if there are no more questions, well, I guess we are right a little bit past 1 o'clock. I'd like to really thank you to people who came and listened to these great speakers. That was very informative and very good. I actually learned a lot.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Slavka. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Robbie. Really very informative. And
Yes.
we'll keep in touch. These problems are not going away on our campuses and in our communities. So thank you for all that you do.